If you feel guilty for resting, guilty for saying no, guilty for choosing yourself, guilty for needing space, guilty for not replying fast enough, guilty for having needs at all, listen closely, because this isn't just being kind. It's a pattern, and the truth behind that pattern is simple, but it changes everything. The empath is often the child who was never allowed to be selfish. Not selfish in the cruel way, selfish in the human way, the way a child is supposed to be selfish. Needing comfort, needing attention, needing reassurance, needing a safe place to be messy, needing someone to say, "You matter too," educational and motivational, not medical advice. But if you've lived this, you don't need a textbook to recognize it. Because when you were young, you learned something early. You learned that having needs created problems, that your emotions were too much, that your sadness was inconvenient, that your anger made you bad, that asking for help came with a cost. So you did what smart children do. You adapted. You became easy to handle. You became the one who didn't cause trouble. You became the one who could feel the mood in the room before anyone said a word. You learned how to read faces, predict reactions, and adjust yourself so the room stayed calm. And people praised you for it. They called you mature. They called you understanding. They called you strong. But nobody asked what it cost you. And that cost was you. You learned to earn love by being good for other people. You learned to earn closeness by being useful. You learned to earn safety by being small. So now, as an adult, you confuse love with anxiety. You confuse connection with tension. You confuse being chosen with being needed. And you don't even realize you're doing it. You just feel this invisible pressure to stay good, to stay easy, to stay understanding. Even when it's slowly draining you. Let me ask you something that might hit harder than you expect. What did it cost you to become the person everyone calls so kind? Because for a lot of empaths, kindness wasn't a choice. At first, it was a strategy, a way to avoid conflict, a way to avoid rejection, a way to avoid being punished emotionally. So you became the helper, the fixer, the listener, the one who carries. And you call it empathy. But much of it isn't empathy. It's survival. Real empathy doesn't erase you. Real empathy doesn't require self-abandonment. Real empathy includes you. If your empathy always ends with you exhausted, resentful, and quietly disappearing, it's not because you're broken. It's because you were trained to disappear. This is the core wound for so many empaths. You weren't allowed to have normal needs without consequences. You weren't allowed to be inconvenient. You weren't allowed to say, "I want." You weren't allowed to say, "I don't like this." You weren't allowed to say, "Stop." And if you did, you got a message, maybe through criticism, maybe through silence, maybe through withdrawal, maybe through being compared to someone better. But the message was the same. Your needs create distance. Your needs create conflict. Your needs create rejection. So you became someone who doesn't have needs, or someone who doesn't admit them. And now you might not even recognize what you need until your body forces you to notice. You call it burnout. You call it numbness. You call it losing motivation. You call it being tired of people. But often, it's your nervous system saying, "I can't keep living like this." Because once you become easy, the world starts expecting it. People start relying on your softness. They lean on your patience. They use your understanding as an excuse to do less. And the empath doesn't just tolerate it. The empath explains it. The empath forgives it. The empath says, maybe they're going through something, and maybe they are. But empathy without boundaries turns into permission, and permission turns into patterns. Here's the painful truth that frees you. Some people don't love you. They love how you regulate them. They love how you don't demand much. They love how you don't hold them accountable. They love how you take crumbs and call it connection. And if that sentence stings, it's not because you're weak. It's because a part of you already knows it's true. Because that child part of you still believes this. If I'm good enough, they'll finally treat me well. If I'm patient enough, they'll finally appreciate me. If I explain it the right way, they'll finally understand. If I love harder, it'll finally become safe. But that belief wasn't created in adulthood. That belief was created by a child trying to survive emotionally. When you're small, you can't control the environment, so you control yourself. You become hyper-aware, hyper-responsible, hyper-vigilant, and you call it being nice, but it's really your nervous system saying, I have to manage this room or I'm not safe. So let's get extremely practical. Here are signs you're still living from that child who wasn't allowed to be selfish. You feel guilty after setting a reasonable boundary. You replay conversations for hours. You worry people will abandon you for needing space. You apologize for things you didn't do. You over-explain because you feel like your needs require permission. You say, yes, while your body says no. You feel anxious when someone is disappointed, even if you did nothing wrong. And maybe the biggest sign of all, you feel responsible for other people's comfort. That right there is the imprint. Because in a healthy environment, a child learns something simple. My feelings belong here. My needs are not dangerous. I can be upset and still be loved. I can say no and still be safe. But if you didn't learn that, you learned a substitute. I must be pleasing to stay connected. And I want to say this clearly, because empaths blame themselves too easily. This isn't your fault. This is adaptation. This is intelligence. This is a sensitive nervous system learning to navigate emotional unpredictability. But what saved you then can sabotage you now, because adult life requires something different. Adult life requires self-loyalty. And for many empaths, self-loyalty feels like selfishness at first. It feels wrong. It feels harsh. It feels like you're becoming someone you're not, but you're not becoming someone else. You're becoming the version of you that was never allowed to exist. The version with needs, the version with limits, the version with preferences, the version that can say, I matter too, without shaking inside. This is the message I want you to carry, and I want you to remember it when guilt shows up. You're not here to earn love by abandoning yourself. You're here to be loved while staying yourself. Now let's talk about why the word selfish hits an empath so hard. Because for a lot of you, selfishness was used like a weapon. If you asked for something, you were told you were ungrateful. If you expressed a need, you were told you were dramatic. If you protested, you were told you were disrespectful. So you learned to associate self-advocacy with shame. And shame doesn't just stop behavior. Shame changes identity. It makes you believe, if I choose myself, I am bad. So you become good. You become the one who helps, the one who understands, the one who forgives quickly, the one who carries silently. And people call you an empath. But then life happens, and you start noticing something you can't keep absorbing without consequences. Your body holds the stress. Your mind holds the weight. Your relationships start feeling one-sided, and the empath reaches a moment that looks quiet on the outside, but it's huge on the inside. You stop hoping people will change just because you're kind. That's the moment healing begins. Because hope is beautiful, but hope becomes a trap when it keeps you in places that harm you. You don't need less empathy. You need more discernment. You don't need to be colder. You need to be clearer. You don't need to stop caring. You need to stop carrying. Let me ask you another question that can change your life if you answer it honestly. When was the last time you asked for what you needed without apologizing for it? Most empaths don't even realize how often they apologize for existing. They apologize before they speak. They apologize while they speak. They apologize after they speak, even when they've done nothing wrong. And that's not humility, that's conditioning. So what does real healing look like for an empath? It looks like pausing before you say yes. It looks like asking yourself, do I want to do this or do I feel forced to do this? It looks like noticing the difference between love and pressure. It looks like letting someone be disappointed without rescuing them from that feeling. It looks like shorter explanations. It looks like not chasing people who only respond when you're useful. It looks like choosing relationships where your needs don't threaten the bond. And then something surprising happens. You get calmer, not because you stopped feeling, because you stopped fighting yourself. A lot of empath anxiety is internal conflict. I want to say no, but I'm afraid. I want to rest, but I feel guilty. I want to speak up, but I don't want to lose them. So you split yourself. One part performs, the other part suffers. Healing is integration. You bring yourself back together. And when you do, you stop being easy to manipulate. Because manipulation relies on your guilt. It relies on your fear of being seen as selfish. It relies on your need to be the good one. But once you understand where that guilt came from, you start changing your relationship with it. You stop treating guilt like a command. You start treating it like a signal that you're breaking an old rule. And the old rule was this: keep everyone comfortable, even if it costs you. So here's a simple test that protects you. If you set a boundary and feel guilt, it doesn't automatically mean the boundary is wrong. It often means the boundary is new, and you are allowed to be new. You are allowed to be unfamiliar to people who benefited from the old you. You are allowed to disappoint someone who was comfortable with your self-abandonment. This is what the healed empath understands. Your peace is not negotiable. Your needs are not a problem. Your nervous system matters. Your life is not a donation center. And this doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love clean. Because when you stop overgiving, the love you do give becomes chosen. It becomes honest. It becomes sustainable. Now, there's a fear underneath all of this that keeps empaths stuck. If I stop giving, who will stay? And the answer is both painful and freeing. The people who only stayed because you gave too much were never safe to build with. They were safe to serve, not safe to love. You deserve relationships where you don't have to shrink to be kept.